The screams were still echoing in my ears, the screams of my newborn daughter Sophia, snatched from my arms just hours after she was born. But even louder than her cries was the sound of my own family laughing. My mother, my father, my sister. Laughing as my father clamped a hand over my mouth, laughing as my sister walked away with my baby, laughing as they told me they'd thrown all my belongings into the trash. That's when I knew everything had to change. And that hospital room camera caught every single thing. What I did with that footage left them utterly pale. I need to start from the beginning because none of this makes sense without the crushing weight of context. My name is Rachel. I'm almost 30 now, but I was 27 when everything happened. That night, that single horrifying night, it aged me about 5 years. Growing up, I always knew my sister, Vanessa, was the golden child. She's 3 years older than me, and from the moment I could form memories, I understood my place in our family's unspoken hierarchy. Vanessa got the bigger bedroom, I got the cramped one. Vanessa got new clothes. I wore hand-me-downs from distant cousins. Vanessa's report card, even with C's, was celebrated on the fridge. My straight A's? They earned me a perfunctory pat on the head and a sharp reminder not to brag. My parents, Linda and Robert Hayes, they ran a successful accounting firm. They prided themselves on logic and fairness, which made their blatant favoritism towards Vanessa all the more bewildering, almost cruel. I spent my entire childhood desperately trying to earn their approval, thinking that maybe, just maybe, if I was smart enough, accomplished enough, perfect enough, they'd finally see me. Vanessa married her high school sweetheart, Derek, when she was 25. The wedding cost $40,000, paid for by my parents. Every single cent. As a wedding gift, they bought them a house. A whole house. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, granite countertops, the works. When I graduated from nursing school at the top of my class, my parents took me to Olive Garden. Vanessa didn't even bother to show up. I met James at the hospital where I worked. He was a physical therapist with the kindest eyes and a laugh that made me feel genuinely safe, truly seen. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. The engagement ring was modest. We were saving for a house. My parents' contribution to my wedding? A whopping $2,000 and a lecture about fiscal responsibility. We had a small, intimate ceremony at a local venue. Vanessa complained the entire time about the folding chairs and the cash bar. My mother, of course, sided with her, suggesting I should have planned better if I wanted my wedding to be nice. I learned to accept it. Some people win the parent lottery and some people just don't, but I had James, and in my heart that was more than enough. When I got pregnant, I was terrified and excited in equal measure. James was absolutely over the moon. We'd been trying for 6 months, and seeing those 2 pink lines felt like winning something incredibly precious, something just for us. I called my parents to share the news. My mother's response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, dear. Vanessa is thinking about having another baby too. Wouldn't it be fun if you were pregnant together?" Vanessa already had 2 kids, Mason and Lily, aged 5 and 3. She'd had 2 perfect pregnancies, minimal morning sickness, textbook deliveries, and babies who slept through the night by week 8. My mother never stopped talking about how naturally motherhood came to Vanessa. My pregnancy was different. I had hyperemesis gravidarum, which is a fancy way of saying I vomited constantly for 5 excruciating months. I lost weight instead of gaining it. I was hospitalized twice for dehydration. Work became nearly impossible, but I pushed through because we desperately needed my income. My mother visited me once during those months. She stayed for 20 minutes, told me I looked tired, and left to go shopping with Vanessa. James was my rock. He held my hair back, brought me saltines and ginger ale, drove me to every single appointment. His parents, who lived in Oregon, sent care packages filled with thoughtful gifts and called weekly to check on me. They couldn't travel due to his father's health, but they promised to visit as soon as our baby arrived. As my due date approached, James and I poured all our love into preparing our small apartment. We'd saved enough to move into a 2-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood. The nursery was tiny, but it was perfect, painted a soft yellow with white furniture that we'd painstakingly assembled ourselves. We were ready. Labor started 3 days before my due date. Contractions woke me at 4 o'clock in the morning, and by 7 o'clock we were at the hospital. I'd worked in that hospital for 6 years. These were my colleagues, my friends. I felt as safe as anyone could feel while their body was trying to turn itself inside out. 18 hours. That's how long I was in labor. 18 hours of pain that completely rewrote my understanding of what my body could endure. James never left my side. He breathed with me, held my hand, whispered encouragement when I was sure I couldn't go on. Finally, at 1 o'clock in the morning, our daughter was born. 7 pounds 4 ounces. Olive skin, dark hair, perfect little fingers that gripped mine with surprising strength. We named her Sophia Grace. The nurses cleaned her, checked her vitals, and placed her in my arms. James was crying. I was crying. Sophia was crying. The room was full of pain and joy and exhaustion, And a love so overwhelming it felt like drowning in the best possible way. I had texted my parents when labor started. They hadn't responded. I texted them again when Sophia was born, including a photo. Nothing. The nurses moved me to a recovery room around 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a private room because I worked there, and my manager had pulled some strings. James had gone to the cafeteria to grab food since neither of us had eaten since noon the previous day. Sophia was sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside my bed, swaddled in pink and white hospital blankets. I was dozing, my body screaming at me despite the pain medication, when the door opened. My mother walked in. She was wearing a purple tracksuit and an expression of mild irritation. She didn't look at Sophia. She didn't congratulate me. She just walked to the foot of my bed and said those words that are burned into my brain forever. Your sister's family is on its way, and they will be staying in your room. I blinked at her, trying to make sense of the sentence. My brain was foggy from exhaustion and medication. What? Vanessa, Derek, and the kids, she explained as if I were dense. They're driving here now. They'll need to stay at your apartment for a few days. I already have your keys. She held up my keychain, which must have been in my purse. They'll be there by morning. The words wouldn't compute. Mom, I just had a baby. We're bringing Sophia home tomorrow. Where are we supposed to stay? She shrugged, a dismissive gesture that cut me deeper than any sharp word. That's not really my problem, Rachel. Vanessa's house is being fumigated. Something about termites. It has to be done now, and they can't stay with us because we're having the kitchen renovated. Your place is the logical solution. But I'm bringing my newborn home. My voice was thin, desperate. Figure it out, she said, already turning to leave. Something hot and desperate rose in my chest. Where will I go? I just had a baby. The door swung open again and Vanessa swept in, wearing designer athleisure and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, poor you, she cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy, a sound I knew all too well. Let me make it easier for you. She walked straight to the bassinet. My heart stopped. Vanessa, don't. She reached down and scooped Sophia into her arms, blanket and all. Let me take care of it. You look exhausted, Ra. I'm an experienced mom. I know what I'm doing. Sophia had been sleeping peacefully. The moment Vanessa lifted her, she started crying. Not fussing, not whimpering, but full-throated newborn screams that filled the entire room. Give her back. My voice came out strangled, a raw plea. See, she's hungry probably. I'll take her to the nursery. Give me my daughter. I tried to sit up, tried to reach for her, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I had pushed a human being out of my body hours ago. Everything hurt. Vanessa backed toward the door, holding my screaming baby like she was a prop. You're being dramatic. I'm helping you. I opened my mouth to yell, to scream for the nurses, to do anything to get my baby back. A hand clamped over my mouth. Large, callous, terrifyingly familiar. My father had entered the room without me noticing. He pressed his palm against my face hard enough to hurt, muffling my voice. She just made it easy for you, he said, his voice cold, devoid of warmth. Just figure it out. And yes, your stuff is in the trash bin. We figured you don't need it anymore, so collect it before the trash takes it. They started laughing. All three of them. My mother's high titter, Vanessa's nasty giggle, my father's deep chuckle. They laughed while Sophia screamed in my sister's arms, while my father's hand covered my mouth, while I tried desperately to fight against my own exhausted body. Then they left. The door closed behind them. My father released my mouth. I heard their laughter fade down the hallway. I sat there in the sudden crushing silence, shaking. Sophia's cries were fading into the distance. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run after them, to fight, but I couldn't even stand up without assistance. The door opened. I nearly sobbed with relief, thinking it was James returning. It was Sarah, one of the night nurses. Rachel, I heard crying. Is everything okay? They took her. I gasped, my voice hoarse. My sister took Sophia. They took my baby. Sarah's face transformed from concern to alarmed. What? Who? My family. My sister took her. She said they said. Words weren't forming correctly. Sarah pressed the call button and spoke rapidly into it. Within seconds, 2 more nurses and a security guard were in my room. I explained through tears what had happened. They found Vanessa in the hallway, still holding Sophia, arguing with a nurse who'd stopped her from leaving the maternity ward. A supervisor I knew, Margaret, personally removed Sophia from Vanessa's arms and brought her back to me. I held my daughter so tightly, breathing in her smell, feeling her warmth, checking her over to make sure she was okay. I'm calling the police, Margaret said, her voice firm. That was attempted kidnapping. She's my sister, I said numbly. They're my family. I don't care if she's the Pope, Margaret shot back. Nobody takes a baby from their mother. Vanessa was screaming in the hallway now. I'm her aunt. I have rights. She gave me permission. My father's voice joined in. This is a family matter. You have no authority here. James came running around the corner, 2 coffees in his hands. He took one look at the scene, my shaking body, Sophia back in my arms, the nurses, security, my parents yelling. And his face went white. What happened? I told him. I watched his expression cycle through confusion, horror, and then pure incandescent rage. James, who'd never raised his voice to anyone in the time I'd known him, started yelling at my father in the middle of the hospital corridor. Security removed my family from the floor. My parents and Vanessa were banned from the maternity ward. I filed a police report. The officers were sympathetic, but explained that family situations were complicated, and without clear evidence of intent to permanently take the child, charges were unlikely to stick. James called a locksmith from my hospital bed, and had our apartment locks changed immediately. We stayed an extra day at the hospital because I was too scared to leave, too terrified of what they might do next. During that time, something clicked in my exhausted brain. I remembered. Our apartment building had installed new security systems 6 months earlier. Every unit had a camera in the main room that fed to an app on our phones. James had set it up and mostly forgotten about it, but it was there, recording. I opened the app on my phone with shaking hands. The footage was all there. My parents letting themselves in with my keys. My mother going through our things, casually putting items into trash bags. My father carrying our nursery furniture out of the apartment. Vanessa directing them like she was staging a home. Pointing at what to keep and what to throw away. They threw away the quilt James's grandmother had painstakingly made for Sophia, embroidered with her name. They tossed out the rocking chair we'd bought at an estate sale and refinished together. They dumped bags of baby clothes, diapers, blankets, everything we'd so lovingly prepared. Then they moved their own suitcases into our bedroom, put their kids' toys in our nursery, set up their laptops on our kitchen table. The audio was clear too. My mother laughing about how I'd finally learned my place. My father joking about how we wouldn't be able to afford a lawyer to fight them. Vanessa saying she'd always wanted my apartment because it had better natural light than her house, and maybe after staying there a few days she'd convince Derek they should buy it from us. They talked about me like I was an obstacle and inconvenience. My father said I'd been a disappointment from birth, always needy, always demanding attention. My mother agreed, saying at least Vanessa had given them grandchildren they could be proud of. Vanessa said, once we're settled in there, we can probably convince her to let us stay permanently. She's a pushover. And if Rachel gets mad, Mom and Dad can threaten to cut her off. Not that there's anything to cut her off from. They laughed. They drank our wine. They threw away my daughter's things and they laughed. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't believe what else is coming, and trust me, there's a lot more to this story. I watched the entire video 3 times, making sure I understood every word, every nuance of their betrayal. Then I saved it to multiple cloud services and made copies on 2 separate thumb drives. James watched it once and had to leave the room. I heard him crying in the bathroom. When we finally went home 2 days later, we didn't go to our apartment. We went to a hotel. James called his cousin, who was a lawyer. We set up a consultation for the following week. The apartment was exactly as the video showed, trashed. Our belongings were scattered across the dumpster behind the building. Some things were salvageable. Many weren't. The beautiful quilt with Sophia's name embroidered on it was stained beyond saving. I cried over it in the parking lot while James held me and Sophia slept in her car seat, blissfully unaware. My parents called 18 times that first day. Vanessa called 32 times. I blocked all their numbers. They showed up at the hotel, but we'd registered under James's mother's maiden name. They couldn't find us. The lawyer Michelle Chun was a sharp, no-nonsense family law specialist. She watched the video with an increasingly grim expression. This is cut and dry, she said, her voice firm. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, conspiracy to commit kidnapping based on what happened at the hospital. I can work with this. I don't want money, I told her, my voice shaking but resolute. I just want them to leave us alone. Forever. We can get you money and a restraining order, Michelle countered. Trust me when I say you want both. Michelle explained the legal strategy carefully. We would pursue both criminal charges and a civil suit. The criminal case would establish the severity of their actions, while the civil case would compensate us for damages and emotional distress. She warned me it would be ugly. Family law cases always were. But this one had the potential to get particularly nasty given my parents' resources and their clear willingness to manipulate situations. They're going to try to destroy your credibility, Michelle said. They'll dig up every mistake you've ever made, every argument you've had, every less than perfect moment of your life. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Sophia, sleeping peacefully in her carrier beside me. My resolve solidified. Yes. The first week after we met with Michelle was spent gathering evidence. We documented everything we'd lost from the apartment. James took hundreds of photos of the destroyed items in the dumpster. I wrote out a detailed timeline of every instance of favoritism and mistreatment I could remember, from my earliest childhood memories to the present day. It was therapeutic in a way, finally putting words to experiences I'd spent years minimizing, burying deep down. My parents' first move was to show up at my workplace. They couldn't find where I lived, but they knew which hospital I worked at. I'd taken 6 weeks of maternity leave, but they came anyway, demanding the front desk tell them when I'd be back. Hospital security escorted them out. My manager, Patricia, called me at home to let me know. I flagged their names in our system, she said. If they come back, we're calling the police immediately. How are you holding up, Rachel? I've been better, I admitted, a raw honesty I rarely allowed myself. Take the full 12 weeks if you need it, Patricia said, her voice genuinely kind. Your job will be here when you're ready. That unexpected kindness from my manager, someone who had no obligation to support me beyond standard employment policies, made me cry harder than anything my family had done. It showed me what actual care looked like. Meanwhile, Vanessa had started a social media campaign. She posted long rambling statuses about how I'd abandoned the family, how I'd overreacted to a simple misunderstanding, how I was keeping Sophia away from her loving grandparents and aunts and uncles. She painted herself as the ultimate victim, the caring older sister trying desperately to help her ungrateful younger sibling. The comments were split. Some of her friends, who only knew her curated public persona, rallied around her. Others, including a few people from high school who remembered exactly how she treated me, called her out. One former classmate, Beth Morrison, wrote a long comment detailing an incident from 9th grade where Vanessa had deliberately ruined my science fair project the night before it was due, because I was getting more attention than her. Vanessa deleted the comment and blocked Beth, but not before Beth screenshot it and sent it directly to me. Thought you might need this, her message said. I always knew your sister was cruel. I'm sorry I never said anything back then. I forwarded it to Michelle. Every piece of evidence helped establish the pattern of behavior. My parents took a different approach. They sent letters, long detailed letters about how hurt they were, how family was supposed to forgive and forget, how I was tearing apart the Hayes family legacy. My father wrote about his own father, about how they had disagreements but always worked through them. My mother wrote about sacrifice and duty and honoring your parents. Neither of them mentioned trying to give away my apartment while I was in labor. Neither mentioned Vanessa trying to take my newborn. They'd rewritten history in their minds, turned themselves into wounded victims of an unstable daughter's paranoia. Michelle told me not to respond. Let them hang themselves with their own words, she advised. Every letter they send that fails to acknowledge what they actually did makes our case stronger. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 months after the incident. James and I had to appear in person. I was terrified of seeing my family again, of being in the same room as them. Michelle, sensing my apprehension, arranged for us to arrive and leave separately through different entrances. I saw them anyway in the courthouse hallway. My mother looked older, more tired. My father's jaw was set in that stubborn, unyielding way I remembered from countless childhood arguments. Vanessa looked smug, like she thought this was all going to blow over and I'd come crawling back. Derek was with her, looking profoundly uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The hearing itself was brief. Both sides presented basic outlines of their cases. My parents' lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Gregory Winters, tried to characterize the apartment incident as a family miscommunication. He claimed my parents had genuinely believed I'd agreed to let Vanessa's family stay there. Michelle stood up with a tablet and played a 30-second clip from the apartment video. Just the part where my mother said, "She'll finally learn her place." Judge Valerie Patterson's expression turned to stone. Counsel approached the bench. There was a hushed conversation I couldn't hear. When the lawyers returned to their seats, Gregory Winters looked considerably less confident. "We'll reconvene in 6 weeks for the full hearing," Judge Patterson said, her voice cutting through the tension. "In the meantime, I'm granting a temporary restraining order. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes and Ms. Vanessa Morrison, you are to have no contact with the plaintiff or her family. That includes direct contact, indirect contact through third parties, and any social media posts referencing this case or the plaintiff. Am I clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," they mumbled in unison, their smugness gone, replaced by a sullen obedience. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. But the peace didn't last. My parents found ways around the restraining order. They couldn't contact me directly, but they could contact James's parents. They called his mother, Diane, crying about how they'd been unfairly portrayed, how they missed their granddaughter, how they just wanted to make amends. James's mother, a true saint, listened politely, then said, "If you genuinely wanted to make amends, you would have started with an apology instead of trying to manipulate another grandparent into doing your dirty work. Don't call this number again." Click. They tried my workplace next, sending flowers and cards addressed to me. Patricia intercepted them and documented everything before throwing them away. Each violation was reported to Michelle, who meticulously compiled them for the judge. My extended family got involved too. My mother's sister, Aunt Carol, called me from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, thinking it might be related to a work shift change. "Rachel, honey, your mother is devastated," Carol said without preamble. "Whatever happened between you two? Surely you can find it in your heart to forgive. She's your mother. Did she tell you what she did?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, something new I was finding within myself. "She said there was a misunderstanding about your apartment. Did she tell you she threw away my baby's things while I was in labor? Did she tell you my sister tried to kidnap my newborn from the hospital?" Silence. "Aunt Carol, I have video evidence of everything. Would you like me to send it to you?" "And no, I don't think that's necessary. I'm sure there are two sides." "There aren't," I interrupted, my voice gaining strength. "There's what happened, which I have on video, and there's the lies they're telling everyone else. I'm done being gaslit by this family." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt a powerful surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time: agency. I'd never stood up to a family member like that before. The weeks leading up to the full hearing were exhausting. I had to give a deposition, which meant sitting in a room with Gregory Winters while he asked me invasive questions designed to make me look bad. He asked about my marriage, my finances, my mental health history, my relationship with my parents growing up. Michelle had prepared me for this. "Answer honestly but briefly," she coached me. "Don't elaborate unless asked. Don't get emotional if you can help it. Did you ever resent your sister?" Winters asked, his tone loaded. "Sometimes," I answered honestly. "Did you ever feel your parents treated her better than you?" "Yes." "Isn't it possible that your perception of unequal treatment has colored your interpretation of their recent actions?" "No," I stated, looking him directly in the eye. "I have video evidence of their recent actions. Their words speak for themselves." He tried several more angles, but Michelle shut down anything too far out of bounds. When it was Michelle's turn to question my parents, I got to watch them squirm. "Mrs. Hayes, can you explain why you entered your daughter's apartment without her permission while she was in labor?" "We had her keys. Vanessa needed a place to stay." "Did Rachel give you permission to use those keys to enter her apartment?" "Well, no. But did she give you permission to remove her belongings? To throw them away?" "We were making room." "Yes or no, Mrs. Hayes? Did your daughter give you permission to throw away her possessions?" My mother's face flushed a deep, uncomfortable red. "No." Watching my father's deposition was harder. He was better at maintaining composure, at deflecting questions with questions, but even he couldn't explain away the video footage. "Mr. Hayes, in this recording we hear you say, and I quote, 'She's been a disappointment from birth.' Were you referring to your daughter, Rachel?" "That was taken out of context." "What context would make that statement acceptable to say about your child who had just given birth?" He had no answer. Just a blank, stony stare. Vanessa's deposition was a disaster for their side. She got defensive immediately, snapping at Michelle's questions and contradicting herself multiple times. When asked why she'd taken Sophia from the bassinet, she first said she was trying to help, then said Sophia was crying and I wasn't responding, then admitted Sophia hadn't been crying until she picked her up. "Were you planning to return the baby to Rachel?" Michelle asked calmly. "Of course." "Then why did you head toward the exit instead of toward her bed?" "The nursery was in the opposite direction. You were heading toward the elevator." Vanessa's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Her story didn't hold together under scrutiny. Between depositions, I was trying to be a new mother. Sophia was colicky, which meant hours of crying that nothing seemed to soothe. I was sleep-deprived, emotionally drained, and barely holding it together. James did everything he could, but he had to return to work after 2 weeks of paternity leave. There were nights I sat in the nursery at 3 o'clock in the morning, rocking a screaming Sophia, wondering if I'd made a mistake by pursuing legal action. Maybe it would have been easier to just move away, change our names, disappear. The stress was crushing, a physical weight. But then I'd remember my father's hand over my mouth. I'd remember Vanessa's laugh as she held my crying baby. I'd remember my mother saying I'd finally learned my place. And I'd know I was doing the right thing. The criminal case moved faster than the civil one. The prosecutor, a woman named Amanda Rodriguez, was passionate about the attempted kidnapping charge. She built her career on protecting vulnerable victims, and she saw Vanessa's actions as clear-cut. "New mothers are in an incredibly vulnerable state," Amanda explained during one of our meetings. "Physically, hormonally, emotionally. What your sister did wasn't just illegal, it was predatory. She knew you couldn't fight back effectively in that moment." The criminal trial for Vanessa happened 4 months after the incident. I had to testify, which meant facing her in court. She stared at me the entire time I was on the stand, her expression cold and hateful. It should have scared me, but instead it made me angry. How dare she look at me like I was the villain in this story? I told the truth clearly and calmly. I described the labor, the exhaustion the moment she took Sophia. The jury watched the hospital security footage of her trying to leave the maternity ward with my baby. They heard the nurse's testimony about how she'd argued that she had the right to take her niece. The defense tried to argue that Vanessa had genuinely believed she was helping, that postpartum situations were confusing and emotions ran high. But several witnesses testified that Vanessa had been calm and deliberate, not confused or panicked. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before finding her guilty of misdemeanor child endangerment. The original felony kidnapping charge didn't stick because she hadn't made it out of the hospital, but the conviction was still significant. Vanessa's sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. She stood before the judge looking small and angry, nothing like the confident sister who'd bullied me my entire life. Judge Patterson looked down at her with cold eyes. "Ms. Morrison, you violated one of the most sacred bonds, that between a mother and her newborn child. You exploited your sister's physical vulnerability for your own purposes. While I cannot impose the sentence I believe this crime truly deserves, given the plea agreement, I want you to understand the gravity of your actions." Vanessa got 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was required to attend parenting classes, which everyone in the courtroom recognized as the insult it was. She was also ordered to pay $5,000 in restitution and court costs. She cried through the whole sentencing, but I don't think she cried from remorse. She cried because she'd been publicly humiliated and held accountable for the first time in her life. My parents' criminal trial was smaller, less traumatic. They pleaded no contest to the breaking and entering charges in exchange for reduced sentences. My father got 6 months of house arrest with an ankle monitor. My mother got 300 hours of community service. They both had to pay fines and court costs. The civil trial was the final battle. This was where the real money was on the line, and my parents fought it viciously. They hired expert witnesses to testify about the value of the destroyed property, trying to argue that most of it was worthless. They brought in a psychologist who'd never met me to suggest I might be exaggerating my emotional distress for financial gain. Michelle dismantled every argument. She had receipts for most of what we bought for Sophia. She had testimony from James's grandmother about the handmade quilt, including photos of it and statements about the hours of work it represented. She had my medical records showing I'd been prescribed anti-anxiety medication after the incident. She had testimony from my therapist, whom I'd started seeing to process the trauma. The jury awarded us $48,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to matter. Enough to put a down payment on our house. Enough to cover our legal fees and still have something left. Enough to prove that actions have consequences. When the verdict was read, I watched my father's face turn gray. He thought his money and his reputation would protect him. They hadn't. The restraining order hearing was the last piece. This one was simpler. We just had to prove that my family posed an ongoing threat to our safety and peace. Given the criminal convictions, the video evidence, and the documented attempts to circumvent the temporary restraining order, Judge Patterson granted us a 5-year order without hesitation. Should the defendants violate this order, she said, looking directly at my parents and Vanessa, they will face immediate arrest and jail time. I strongly suggest you take this seriously. We walked out of that courthouse for the last time with our heads held high. James carried Sophia, who was now 6 months old and fascinated by everything around her. She had no idea that the people sitting behind us in that courtroom had tried to destroy her family before she was a day old. The whole process took 6 months total. 6 months of depositions, court dates, mediation attempts. My parents hired their own lawyer who tried to paint me as an unstable new mother with postpartum delusions. That fell apart when we presented the video footage, the hospital incident reports, and testimony from 4 nurses who'd witnessed the attempted kidnapping. Vanessa's lawyer tried to argue she was just trying to help, that families help each other. The prosecutor pointed out that physically taking a newborn from a hospital without parental consent isn't help. It's felony kidnapping. My father's lawyer claimed the apartment entry was legal because they had my keys. Michelle produced the text messages showing I'd never given permission, plus the video of them discussing how they were going to lie to me about it. In the end, I got a 5-year restraining order against all 3 of them. They were required to stay 500 feet away from me, James, Sophia, our home, and my workplace. They were ordered to pay $48,000 in damages, which covered the destroyed property, legal fees, and emotional distress. None of them ever apologized. Not once. The money from the settlement let James and me put a down payment on a small house in a different town. A fresh start. I transferred to a hospital 40 minutes away. We changed our phone numbers and made all our social media private. That was nearly 2 years ago. Sophia's 2 years old now. She's brilliant and funny and has James's kind eyes. She'll never know my parents. She'll never play with her cousins. Sometimes that makes me sad, a quiet ache for the family I always wished I had. But mostly, it makes me profoundly grateful that I can protect her from the kind of toxicity I grew up with. James's parents visit every few months. They're wonderful grandparents, the kind who get down on the floor to play, who remember her favorite books, who call just to hear her voice on speakerphone. Sophia calls them Grammy and Pop. And when she talks about them, her whole face lights up. I got a message last year from Vanessa's husband, Derek. He said he was filing for divorce and wanted me to know he hadn't known about the apartment situation until weeks later. He said Vanessa had told him we'd offered to let them stay there, and he believed her. He apologized and asked if Sophia might meet Mason and Lily someday under supervised conditions. I told him I'd think about it. I'm still thinking. My parents sent a card on Sophia's second birthday. No return address. Inside was a generic happy birthday message and a note saying they forgave me for overreacting and were ready to reconcile when I was ready to apologize. I burned it in the fireplace. Sometimes people ask why I don't try to mend things with my family. They say life is short. Families should stick together. I might regret it someday. I show them the video. I tell them about the hospital. I explain that some bridges need to burn to keep you safe on your side of the river. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle or the money or even the loss of my family. The hardest part was accepting that the people who were supposed to protect me were the ones I needed protection from. The hardest part was mourning parents I never really had while simultaneously celebrating the beautiful, loving family I built myself. But I did it. I survived it. I'm still surviving it. My name is Rachel Hayes. I'm 28 years old and I'm finally free. That hospital room camera caught everything I needed to prove my truth. What I did with that footage turned them pale. When the police showed up at their door, when the lawyers presented the evidence in court, when the judge watched their own words condemn them, they thought I was weak. They thought I'd always be the daughter who swallowed her pain and asked for nothing. They thought wrong. Every night I check on Sophia before I sleep. I watch her breathe, her little chest rising and falling, completely safe in her room, in our house where nobody can hurt her. James and I built this life with our own hands. No help from anyone who tried to tear us down. Some stories don't have happy endings. This one does. It's just not the ending my family wanted. And honestly, that makes it even sweeter. My name is Rachel Hayes. I'm almost 30 years old and I'm finally truly home. Have you ever had to cut ties with family to protect yourself or your children? How did you find the strength to do it? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories.